This is a story about quiet faith, the kind that keeps going even when no one is watching. Eric Nelson stood at the loading dock long after his shift should have ended, watching the last truck pull away into the fading light. The metal door behind him rattled softly as it cooled, a familiar sound that usually brought relief. Tonight, it didn't. He rolled his shoulders, easing the dull ache that had settled there years ago and never fully left. 56 wasn't old, he told himself. Not really, but his body kept its own calendar. One measured in early mornings, heavy pallets, and promises kept without witnesses. Inside the warehouse, the lights buzzed. Everything was exactly where it should be. Pallets stacked straight, floors swept, work done properly. That had always mattered to him, even when it seemed to matter to no one else. Eric checked his phone. No messages, no missed calls, just the time blinking back at him, reminding him he was late again. At home, Meg would understand. She always did. Still, a familiar unease tightened in his chest. Not guilt, exactly, but something close. The quiet fear that showing up faithfully wasn't the same as showing up enough. As he locked the dock door, a thought crossed his mind, uninvited and persistent. What if this is as far as it goes? Not failure. He had avoided that, but not arrival either. Just an endless middle stretching forward and back, indistinguishable. Eric climbed into his truck and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. He thought of Rose and Jason, growing faster than he could keep up with. Of Brandy waiting by the door, tail thumping at the sound of his keys. Of Meg's steady presence, built on years of trust rather than promises of more. He had stayed. He had worked. He had believed quietly that consistency meant something. The engine turned over. The warehouse disappeared in his rearview mirror. Eric drove home with a question he didn't know how to ask yet, only certain of one thing: he wasn't done. The days followed one another without distinction. Eric returned to the warehouse before sunrise, the sky still dark, the air cool against his face. The routine was familiar enough to quiet his thoughts. Clock in, gloves on, lift, carry, stack. Each movement had its place. Each place had been earned. Years passed like that, not dramatically, just steadily. Rose grew taller. Jason's voice changed. Brandy slowed down, sleeping longer in the afternoons. Eric noticed everything even when he didn't comment on it. He had learned early that observation was a form of care. There were moments when leaving would have made sense. A supervisor once hinted that he should look elsewhere if he wanted more. Friends talked about better pay, easier hours, jobs that didn't grind you down quietly over decades. Eric listened. He always listened. Then he stayed. It wasn't stubbornness. It was something harder to explain. A belief that showing up mattered. That reliability was a language of its own, even if few people spoke it back. Some nights, sitting at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed, doubt crept in. Not loud, just persistent. What if loyalty is just fear in disguise? What if consistency isn't courage, but comfort? He never shared those thoughts with Meg. She carried enough already. Instead, he fixed loose hinges, mended what broke, stayed useful in ways that didn't require permission. At work, younger loaders came and went. Eric stayed. When someone needed help, his name came up. When a shift needed covering, he didn't hesitate. Recognition never followed, just trust. And while trust didn't pay extra, it did something else. It built a quiet foundation beneath his feet, one he didn't realize he was standing on. Not yet. The change didn't come with an announcement. It arrived as a question. One afternoon, as Eric wiped sweat from his hands and prepared to clock out, his supervisor stopped him near the lockers. Not hurried, not formal, just thoughtful. "Have you ever thought about training?" Eric hesitated, not because he didn't understand the question, but because he hadn't heard it directed at him before. They needed someone steady, someone the new hires would actually listen to, someone who knew the rhythm of the place without needing to be reminded. Eric said he'd think about it. That night, he sat at the edge of the bed, boots still on, staring at the floor. Meg noticed the way she always did. "They don't ask people like you unless they already trust you," she said quietly. The next weeks were different, slower in some ways. He showed others how to lift without injury, how to stack without shortcuts, how to notice when something was about to go wrong before it did. He spoke less than expected. When he did speak, people listened, and something unexpected happened. He felt useful in a new way, not promoted, not celebrated, but seen. Then came the offer. Modest, practical, a small raise, more responsibility, stability he hadn't planned on having at this stage. Eric signed the paperwork without ceremony. When he told the kids, Rose smiled and said, "I knew they'd figure it out eventually." Jason nodded like it had always been obvious. That night, Eric lay awake longer than usual, not with doubt, but with a strange, cautious relief. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like an endless repetition. It felt like a continuation, and that was enough. The promotion didn't change the warehouse overnight. The noise was the same. The early mornings were the same. The work still demanded respect from the body. What changed was subtler, the way people looked to Eric before acting, the way decisions paused until he weighed in. He took the role seriously, not proudly. He arrived earlier than before, left later, not because anyone asked him to, but because responsibility once accepted had its own weight. Some days, doubt returned in a new form. Why now? Why after all this time? He watched younger workers rush, confident they had time to spare. He remembered thinking the same once. His advice wasn't dramatic, just practical, just honest. "Your back won't forgive you later," he told one kid gently. At home, Meg noticed the difference. Not in money, but in posture. Eric spoke with less hesitation, listened with more patience. The quiet tension he'd carried for years had loosened, though it never fully left. One evening after dinner, Rose asked him to help with something small, moving furniture, fixing a door. Eric realized then how much his presence had shaped their sense of safety. He hadn't been chasing recognition. He'd been building reliability. The warehouse didn't make a speech. Life didn't pause to acknowledge the moment. But the respect was real. And for someone like Eric, real mattered more than loud. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe the years hadn't just passed. They had prepared him. Eric locked the warehouse door as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the empty lot. The air was cooler now, quieter. He stood for a moment, keys in his hand, listening to the stillness settle. At home, Meg was already there. Brandy lifted her head at the sound of the door, tail thumping once before she settled again. Rose and Jason were in the living room, absorbed in their own worlds, comfortable in the way only familiarity allows. Eric joined them without announcing himself. Later that evening, as the house eased into its nighttime rhythm, Eric sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he didn't need. He thought about the years when staying felt invisible, about the doubts he'd carried alone, about how close he'd come, more than once, to believing none of it mattered. What surprised him now wasn't the promotion. It was the peace. Not excitement, not pride, just a calm understanding that he had lived in a way he could stand behind, even if no one had ever noticed. The work had changed him, not by lifting him above others, but by rooting him where he was most needed. Faith, he realized, hadn't been about expecting reward. It had been about choosing the same honest path every day, regardless of outcome. Eric turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the quiet. He hadn't chased success. He had practiced character. And when life finally responded, it felt less like a rival, and more like recognition of what had been there all along.